He was a teacher, a father, a quiet, educated man. But for over a decade, he was also the most feared serial killer in Soviet history. His name was Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. Between 1978 and 1990, he killed and mutilated at least 52 people. Many were children, others were women he had never met. All of them suffered. But to truly understand the monster known as the Butcher of Rostov, we have to start at the beginning. Andrei Chikatilo was born in 1936 in a small Ukrainian village called Yabluchne during one of the darkest periods in Soviet history. His early years were shaped by famine, war, and silence. His mother, Anna, was cold and abusive. His father, Roman, went off to fight in World War II and spent years in a German prison camp. When he returned home, he was weak and considered a traitor by his own government. They lived in a one-room hut, no electricity, no running water, no privacy. As a boy, Andrei shared a bed with his mother, and during the Holodomor, the man-made famine that killed millions, his mother told him that his older brother, Stepan, had been kidnapped and eaten by starving neighbors. Whether it was true or not, the story stayed with him forever. Andrei was small, sickly, and shy. At school, he was mocked and bullied. He was nearsighted, awkward, and wet the bed well into his teens. Worse yet, he began to realize that something was wrong with him. He couldn't perform sexually. He couldn't connect with anyone emotionally. The other boys laughed at him. The girls ignored him. Andrei buried himself in books and communist ideology, hoping that obedience and discipline would make the urges go away. But they didn't. And deep inside, a rage was building. A rage that would one day spill out in the most horrific way imaginable. In the late 1950s, Andrei Chikatilo graduated from university and began working as a teacher in the Soviet education system. Outwardly, he had finally made something of himself. He got married to a woman named Feodosia, a match arranged by his sister. The marriage was awkward, even strange. He remained sexually dysfunctional, and the couple reportedly had no physical relationship. But they did have children, one boy and one girl, conceived through artificial methods encouraged by doctors. By Soviet standards, Chikatilo now had the perfect life: a job, a wife, a home, and 2 children. But inside, he was far from content. His problems with sexual performance continued, and soon they began to leak into his work. As a teacher, he was awkward and timid, often mocked by students. He began exposing himself, touching young girls, and cornering female students. In one case, he attacked a girl in his classroom and was caught, but the school covered it up to avoid scandal. Eventually, he was quietly fired and moved from school to school. But the pattern continued. In 1978, Chikatilo found work as a supply clerk at a factory in Shakhty, near Rostov. It was a quiet job, away from public attention. But that same year, something inside him snapped. He lured a 9-year-old girl named Lena Zakotnova into a small cabin near a river. He attempted to rape her, but when she resisted, he stabbed her multiple times and threw her body into the water. She was found the next day. But instead of Chikatilo being arrested, the police arrested another man, a local named Alexander Kravchenko, who had a criminal record. Under pressure, Kravchenko confessed. He was tried, convicted, and eventually executed. Andrei Chikatilo had just killed his first victim, and the Soviet justice system had punished someone else. It was a lesson he never forgot. He realized that in a system obsessed with appearances, a quiet, polite man like him could get away with murder, and so he did. After getting away with his first murder in 1978, Andrei Chikatilo waited. It wasn't until 1981 that he killed again, but when he didn't stop. Over the next several years, his crimes became more frequent and more brutal. His preferred hunting grounds were train stations, bus terminals, and marketplaces. places full of people yet easy to disappear in. He would scan the crowd for the vulnerable, homeless children, runaways, women alone. He'd offer them food, help, sometimes money or promises of work. Many were hungry, cold, or simply trusting. They followed him willingly. Then he would lead them to the woods, or an abandoned building, or a field. There, Chikatilo would snap. He stabbed his victims, sometimes dozens of times, using knives, screwdrivers, or just his bare hands. He often mutilated the bodies, gouging out eyes, removing organs, even biting off parts of flesh. The violence was frenzied, but it gave him control. For a man who felt powerless his entire life, these moments were when he ruled. In 1984 alone, he killed 15 people, and still, he was invisible. The Soviet authorities struggled. There was no clear pattern, no fingerprints, no witnesses, and serial murder was officially considered a capitalist disease. The idea that such a person could exist in the USSR didn't fit the party line. As a result, the investigation was limited. Files were buried. Local police weren't allowed to share information between regions. Even when Chikatilo was arrested briefly in 1984, he was released. Blood tests didn't match, because the lab was outdated, and he had a rare blood type that threw off results. Innocent men were arrested. One even committed suicide under pressure. The real killer was walking free. By the end of the decade, over 40 victims had died. The press was silent. The people were terrified. But the police had no answers, and Chikatilo had no reason to stop. By late 1990, the murders had gone on for more than a decade. Over 50 people were dead, and panic was spreading across southern Russia. Police finally took a new approach. They placed plainclothes officers at train stations and bus stops, hoping to catch the killer in the act. One of those officers noticed a man loitering near a platform in Shakhty. He wasn't doing anything illegal, just walking in circles, watching people too closely. That man was Andrei Chikatilo. He was arrested on suspicion, but had no weapons, and his ID checked out, so they let him go. But something didn't sit right. Detectives dug deeper. His blood type didn't match the crime scene samples, but new forensic methods were starting to suggest he was still a likely suspect. Surveillance confirmed that he frequently traveled to areas near murder sites. His co-workers mentioned strange behavior, and his previous arrests, including for sexual assault, suddenly looked much more serious. 2 weeks later, Chikatilo was arrested again. This time, they had enough to hold him, but he didn't talk. He sat for days in silence, stone-faced and cold. It wasn't until a brilliant psychiatrist named Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky was brought in that things changed. Instead of accusing him, Dr. Bukhanovsky spoke calmly, even respectfully. He talked about Chikatilo's childhood, his urges, his isolation, and slowly, the killer began to open up. Over 9 days, Chikatilo confessed to 52 murders. He described each one in chilling detail, names, locations, what he felt. There was no remorse, no emotion, just facts. He even took investigators to crime scenes they hadn't discovered yet. For detectives, it was both a breakthrough and a nightmare. They had finally found the killer. But what he told them, they would never forget. In April 1992, the trial of Andrei Chikatilo began in Rostov-on-Don. The man who had confessed to killing 52 people now sat inside a steel cage, surrounded by guards. The authorities feared that if left unprotected, he would be torn apart by the families of his victims. From the moment the trial started, Chikatilo's behavior was erratic, disturbing, even theatrical. He laughed, shouted, stripped off his clothes, and sang loudly in court. At one point, he exposed himself to the judge and claimed to be castrated. Some believed it was a deliberate act, an attempt to appear insane. Others thought he was simply unraveling. But the psychiatrists who examined him agreed on one thing. He was legally sane. He knew what he was doing. He knew it was wrong. During the trial, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, testimonies, confessions, physical evidence, and even Chikatilo's own maps of murder scenes. One by one, the names of the victims were read aloud. The courtroom was filled with rage, tears, and horror. Parents cried, others screamed, some fainted. And through it all, Chikatilo sat, at times grinning, at times staring blankly ahead. On October 14, 1992, the court delivered its verdict, guilty on 52 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death. Chikatilo filed an appeal. It was denied. He then wrote to the president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, begging for a pardon. It was ignored. And so, on February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, Andrei Chikatilo was taken to a soundproof room inside a Moscow prison. He was told to kneel, and with a single shot to the back of the head, his life ended. No final words, no last request. The most infamous killer in Soviet history was gone, but his shadow and the scars he left behind would remain for decades. The execution of Andrei Chikatilo may have ended his life, but it didn't end the pain he left behind. More than 50 families were shattered. Parents buried their children, sisters, brothers, wives, all left with questions that would never be answered. The case forced the Soviet Union, and later Russia, to confront something it had long denied. That evil didn't only exist in the West. It lived among them, in their schools, their factories, their train stations. The investigation also revealed deep failures in the justice system. Innocent men were arrested, one was executed, another took his own life under interrogation. Vital evidence was ignored or misinterpreted because the authorities didn't want to admit that a serial killer could exist in a perfect society. Chikatilo was able to kill for over a decade because the system refused to believe someone like him was even possible. That denial cost dozens of lives. Today, the name Andrei Chikatilo is infamous. In Russia, in Ukraine, and around the world, he is remembered as one of the most sadistic murderers in history. But he didn't just destroy lives. He exposed the cracks in a system that was supposed to protect people. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not just that one man could do such horrible things, but that he was allowed to, again and again, for 12 long years. Because sometimes the real horror isn't the killer in the shadows. It's the silence all around him.